Hi, this is Kerry Artak with Wicked Stocks, bringing you updates, weekly update, a series that we provided now for some months for free on our Wicked Stocks YouTube channel. I should just say a weekly update in the Mag 7. And we begin, and this is for the week, by the way, of Monday, October 20th, just so you know that we're talking this week. Alphabet Inc., symbol GOOGL. We've had some back and forth, closing below the low of the high, then back above. So this is a consolidation area, but I'm just going to kind of fall back to what is the big picture. That is to say, any pullbacks downside into the 224.56 region, this rising almost 2-year channel top. Actually almost 3-year channel top. This is January of 23. 224.56 can contain quarterly selling pressures if tested in the coming weeks. That is to say, through Q1 and above which we still maintain this wide zone right now between 264.24 and 73.57. These are wave counts. You can see the math here. This region, an exhaustion point on a quarterly basis perhaps. And yes, if settled above, longer-term bullish continuation will map out the next objective if that were to occur. But for right now, this is what I would call kind of the 2 to 3 month dynamic for Alphabet. Buying the mid 220s if given the opportunity, or you're long above this area if you're more of the near-term investor, anticipating the mid 260s to lower 270s as a completed objective. On to Amazon. Amazon has tested, if you include this near miss back in July of the 237.68 to 242.52 area, after collapsing off this all-time high region in January of this year to the April lows, we've pushed into this zone. The high settlement price in January was 237.68, the high itself 242.52, and we have fallen away. And in fact, we fell away enough last week where we closed below this significant, I call it a trend-defining channel bottom. So Amazon is looking bearish to me. Below 215.67, this is an area that can be sold. If you're long Amazon and your time horizon is anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks out to a half year or something like that, I don't think there's a solid rationale to stay long Amazon over the near to mid-term. Now, certainly long-term might be another story, but for the next a couple of months, 2 to 3 months, I think 190-136 should be considered in play. And there is a channel bottom at 158.07 that I think is possible. I put this out there just as kind of the worst case scenario that does not become clearly identified as an objective unless we were to also then close below the 190-136.58. So I'm comfortable the 2 to 3 month time frame for Amazon is bearish below 215.67, expecting 190-136. And if we do close this week back above 215.67, that rejection of a pretty classic sell signal does indicate within possibly 3 to 5 weeks, couple of months anyway, back into the upper 230s to low 240s where we can top out on a monthly, possibly quarterly basis. And if over the coming month or two we can close above 242.52, then we enter what I would call a 2 to 3 month buy signal up to this significant 267.62, which will be by that point in time, if it were to occur, a 3-year rising channel top that can contain buying on a quarterly basis, possibly well into 26. But we're not expecting this unless we close above 242.52. On to Meta. Meta's been getting snagged here at this rising 6-7 month channel bottom that this week is at 219.33. And as long as we do not close below this structure on a weekly basis, this market remains stable and can actually continue onward and upward to new highs to 850.22 over the next 2 to 3 months. Holding above 719.33, I see no compelling reason to be short Meta. You're either out or you're long. The big picture over the next 2 to 3 months will allow the low 850s. We do need to close above 762.59 to accelerate that to within possibly as little as 3 to 5 weeks. So if I were a 2 to 3 week swing trader, you're long above 719.33 and you're taking profits at 762.59. And in fact, if you're reluctant to bottom pick this channel bottom, and I could understand why, because it's been pretty sloppy, I would say that you can buy on strength in Meta with any settlement, weekly settlement above 762.59. That's a long shot this week, but if over the next few weeks we close above this descending channel top, And I'll be providing this number to you every single week. If we close above it, that is a clear buy signal to new highs, a clear buy signal inside of 2 months where we should see the 850.22 channel top. That is a 3-year structure that can contain quarterly buying pressures, possibly well into 26. Now for the downside, closing below 719.33 is a sell signal, unto itself. There's also this other channel bottom at 714.10. I would say if we close below 714.10, that does skew Meta to the downside, where over the following 2 to 3 months, I wouldn't be surprised to see 535.14. So if we close below 714.10, I wouldn't be long Meta as we move into the first quarter. Can you be short? Yes. You can play the short side, and then obviously you would stop out or reverse and go long if we were to then close above the 762.59 descending channel top. Going long above 762.59 and actually being short below 714.10. If we close below this structure, I do think this thing can continue unwinding to the downside into the 530s, 540s over the next 2 to 3 months. We certainly have precedent for that kind of move. 535.14, solid support, able to contain quarterly selling pressures, possibly into later 26. Let's move on to Microsoft. Microsoft dilly-dallying, that is a technical term, dilly-dallying around the 509.43 to 511.97 region without any directional emphasis one side or the other. It's just sort of marking time here. So, whether you should be in a trade, a long trade above 511.97 is really up to you at this point. But I do see a case to be made for 540.64. I don't want to call that an objective, but let's just say I wouldn't be surprised to see the lower 540s over the next month or two. This channel top, it can continue to contain monthly, if not quarterly, buying pressures. We did certainly spike above it back in July, but we never closed above it. So it's still a valid structure, and it's really part of a wide range that ends at 566.53. This 5-year channel top we did test in July, and it held beautifully. So this is your zone, low 540s and mid 560s. That is still an area that if you're long Microsoft, you may consider exiting a long position and even playing the short side, because from here, we've tested the 566.53 5-year channel top. You must at least consider the possibility of the 5-year channel bottom, roughly 375, as a potential 1-year target. And once again, there is precedent for that. There's no indication of that, quite honestly. I would say that if over the coming months we were to close back below this July 24, 468.35 high, then we have clarity on a 375, maybe 3 to 5 month objective. But right now, I would say if I'm just looking at this chart, I'm kind of ignoring the 509, 511 area as a significant pivot point because there's been no follow through either side of it. But I will say, if you're a big picture Microsoft trader, you've got a ceiling of resistance, let's just call it 566.53, that can contain quarterly, possibly annual buying pressures, and you have a floor of support at 468.35 that can contain monthly, possibly quarterly selling pressures. Closing below 68.35, the 370s likely. 375's attainable, I'll put that in quotes, attainable over the next full year of activity below 566.53. Let's move on to Apple. Now, Apple we cover every single week at wickedstocks.com, and we provide a much more detailed analysis than what you're seeing here, but we're giving broad brushstroke. It was a settlement a little over a month ago above the 242.33 former channel bottom that has set up 279.08 as a likely 2 to 3 month objective. Now, it was the testing of the 5-year channel bottom at 195.72 back in April that set up 279.08 as a much longer term 1 to 2 year target. There's plenty of precedent for that kind of move over the 1 to 2 week, 2 year time frame, but this is inside of six or 7 months, and having closed above 242.33 over the next 2 to 3 months, 279.08 in reach. If we close any week above this 260.10 high from last December, then we could see this within a month or two. 279.08, solid long-term resistance, able to contain buying not only through the first quarter, but possibly well into 26. Let's take a look at the downside for Apple. And if we do close below 242.33 this week, I think we've got a good high through the rest of the year. There are other elements here that does suggest at least a good high through November. Over the following 3 to 5 weeks, the mid 220s in reach, but I could see this thing unwinding all the way back into the mid 190s potentially by the end of Q1 if we fall back below 240, 233. I would urge you to go to wickedstocks.com if you haven't already. Take advantage of our 5-day free trial, and you'll be able to see Apple stock analysis in much more detail on a weekly basis if you go there and take advantage of that 5-day free trial. Nvidia, we provide this for free every single day on our YouTube channel. You may be already familiar with that. We did set off a sell signal about a week ago below the 187.59 formation. We clarify this much more precisely in our daily analysis, so you might want to just look at the daily video that we put out every single day, our daily Nvidia report. But bottom line, holding below 187.59 will keep this channel bottom at 172.69 as a 1 to 2 week target. 172.69 can contain selling through November and even the rest of the year. And in fact, holding above this rising channel bottom at 172.69 will keep 219.64 in reach over the next 2 to 3 months. And if we do close this week back above 187.59, I think that's very close to the high settlement price of 187.62 from several weeks ago. If we close above this area, then I would see possibly by the end of the year 219.64, a full wave count able to contain monthly, possibly quarterly buying pressures. Downside, our objective 172.69 over the next week or two, as I say, can contain selling through the rest of the year, but if settled below, would tip the market south into the upper 140s within a month, 2 at the most. And I do think there's another case to be made for, over the following 2 to 3 months, we could unwind all the way back into the 110s, 120s. I will present that in image form if we were to start testing or certainly close below 172.69. Tesla, we also provide this every day on our YouTube channel, so you may be already familiar, but big picture, we settled 6 weeks ago above the 363.48 2.5-year channel top, indicating 525.72 as a 5 to 8 month objective. We kept it as a longer-term target because of this rising 7-month channel top at 480.26 that we mentioned can contain monthly buying pressures, and it has already. Below 480.26, you must allow for bearish retracement back into the low 360s. If we close above 480.26, our longer-term objective at 525.72, likely within a matter of 3 to 5 weeks, where we actually could top out through Q1, possibly into later 26. Downside for Tesla, very simply, closing below this low settlement price from a couple of weeks ago at 413.49 should tip the market south into the 360s, 362.93, 365.67 is a newly formed rising channel bottom. This area, once again, able to contain selling through Q1 and above which we maintain a 525.72 5 to 8 month target, which becomes more like 3 to 5 weeks if we were to close above 480.26. And finally, I just want to emphasize the S&P 500, the SPY, which is this image, or the S&P 500 E-mini futures are all testing a 5.5-year channel top that's been holding very well for the last few weeks. And if we cannot get up and over this structure in the coming weeks, the S&P remains very susceptible to a significant downdraft back to the February high or perhaps even lower as we move into later next year. This is a long-term line study, and if we can close above it, all systems go to the upside. That should shift our broader market perspective into a much more bullish mindset. But until then, ever so cautious being along the broader market. It is very susceptible to downside trade, and I would just urge you to go to wickedstocks.com, take advantage of our 5-day free trial. You'll see the specifics of these line studies, and we just sort of break it down very nicely in terms of what is the sell signal that would tell us that after testing long-term resistance, we can now anticipate longer-term bearish rotation. I also present that in our daily SPY report and our weekly S&P 500 index analysis that we provide continuously at wickedstocks.com. I'm going to leave it at that for this week's Mag 7 update. You have a great week.